Good morning, Pop again, Dennis Murray. Uh, I want to go back to gender differences in the two ways of judging. We talked about this on Mother's Day, but I had a number of further observations I wanted to make. I know a number of people who have uh, suffered is the wrong word, but who have lived outside of our incorrect gender bias about the two ways of judging. This includes all men who judge uh, by the process that Jung called feeling, which I refer to as the photo album, um, by personal preference. Culturally, we think of men as people who judge logically. As a result, uh, it's a false assumption, but that is the cultural assumption, and it's largely built in. So that as a result, if you are a man who makes decisions by personal preferences instead of by a rule book, you're living against the cultural expectations. Your community expectations, perhaps even in the family, um, are going to be difficult for you. And in the same way, uh, 40% of the women judge by using the rule book, the process of objective logic, and the community expectation of them is to the contrary. So we see a certain amount of bias against these women because they're not within our expectations. So it's easy to say, well, change your expectations, but it's kind of hard to do that about basics. That's why, if you want to change the world, you start with changing yourself. And you hope that your changes exhibit a little more wisdom from you, and that others around you are drawn to this and inquire and discover the process of revisiting the awe that lives inside us and seeing more, having a refreshed sense of the connectedness between us. And that opens your mind to the possibility that on further information about this gender bias, we realize it's wrong and we slowly start to give it up culturally. It's a huge undertaking. It's not going to occur anytime soon on a large scale, but it can occur in you pretty soon. Um, if you take a look at the any of the material that's widely available now about psychological type is the general category of it. Sometimes it's referred to as temperament, and there's a bunch of theories, a bunch of ways of describing it. But in general, there is this expectation in the culture that women judge a certain way, men another, and that expectation is just no better word, bullshit. Um, is completely unfounded by the facts. There's a 60-40 difference. It's not all or nothing. And there's ample evidence. So, but there's a lot of cultural reinforcement. So I want to talk about specific people. My father was a man um, who judged by his personal preferences. Um, and he he's very, very hard to describe my experience of him for a whole lot of complicated reasons that are well outside of this kind of podcast. Uh, but essentially, his heart was in loving his children and his wife, and they had a wonderful marriage. They were married 62 years the day that we married him. And we asked Mom if she wanted to move it up her back a day, and she said, "No, I think this is a good day." Um, and so, a complicated man, however, very difficult to understand. And I was very fortunate to, by learning a lot about Jungian psychology, to come to appreciate that he had a right to be the way he was, and that he was compensating for cultural biases by being overly aggressive and attempting to be larger, more powerful, more forceful than he was naturally inclined to, as a compensation for the what he perceived to be disapproval. And his mother apparently disapproved of him in that regard. That she seemed to feel that men were supposed to be logical, and he wasn't, and so that was a fault on his part. Uh, his relationship with her made it very difficult for him to suffer that cultural bias from her. And that's just one story. I have friends, brothers, mentors, tutors, uh, men and women, children. Uh, you know, one of my sons makes decisions by feeling. One of my daughters is naturally inclined more towards the rule book, although she's strongly developed her feeling side to the point where it's she's probably marked more by her feeling side now um, than a lot of people. Uh, but I think she still makes decisions based on her idea of logical examination of a series of rules. It's been difficult for all of these people to find their way in the world because they were proceeding against cultural expectations. And, um, I think it's a matter of some real importance for us to change those cultural expectations and to appreciate what these people have to give us. There are a very large number among us, nearly half of us, are, against cultural expectations. And it would be quite useful to the culture if we changed our expectations and began to appreciate the gifts these people bring us. The male version of feeling and the female version of thinking add somewhat to the mix. And just as men and women, both together in the community, add hugely to the mix, and we wouldn't want to do without the contributions in the community of either gender. So enough for today. Um, I'm going to switch to the broader topics of tomorrow. I'm going to talk about where all of this extraordinary, how all of this extraordinary psychological complexity came into being. And then later we're going to talk about fear and we're going to talk about sexuality. And all of these things are so closely connected, it's kind of difficult to sort them out. Okay, bye bye. Enough for today.